Hello, this is Curt Pringle. Thank you for tuning in to Talking Issues series again today. And we have a very interesting discussion ahead. I was going to say a show, but it's not really a show. It's a good discussion with a longtime friend of mine. And I kind of want to start out talking about something that we all know and see, and that is the news media and really newspapers, because the first time I met our guest was while he was a reporter with the Orange County Register. So let me just introduce him. Brian Joseph, glad you're here.
Oh, happy to be here.
And
Thank you for having
glad
me.
you're a part. I know you were a reporter for the Register after you worked for the Sacramento Bee, from 2007, 2013?
Yes, that's correct. 2006 to 2013, I was with the Orange County Register.
So how many people read the Register in 2013?
I believe the circulation around that time was about 300,000.
Yeah. So, it is interesting for a lot of people that subscribe to a newspaper, even two newspapers in Orange County at their house. Back in the 80s and 90s, there were the newspaper battles between the Orange County Register and the LA Times, both of which had over 300,000 daily subscriptions, I think. And then it totally changed when online media and all of that came about.
It did. I entered journalism right at the beginning of that sea change, and I remember even in journalism school talking about the fact that you need to be prepared for the fact that your job is going to change dramatically. And so it was interesting, even as far back as journalism school, there was a sense that there was going to be a big change, but nobody really knew exactly what was going to happen or what it was going to look like. And we're seeing it now, and sadly, it seems pretty clear that the industry just was not prepared for the transition to digital and for what that has meant.
Yeah, and kind of put it in perspective. I mean, if there's 350,000 households that get a newspaper thrown to their doorstep every morning, today, according to numbers I have seen, something with the Orange County Registers down to like 87,000 paper subscriptions. I actually don't get a newspaper at my house anymore. I get I go online and read it that way, but I read it every morning. But it really is that shift. It's pretty dramatic when you think about, 25% what it was just a few decades ago.
It's dramatic in that regard, but it's also, I think, dramatic in terms of how news is consumed, right? Because when you go online, you're choosing particularly the headlines that you want to look at. When you're flipping through a newspaper, you might, through serendipity, find an article that you might not have been interested in if you had just heard about it, but you saw it and you might read it and learn something. And we've lost that now because of the transition to digital, that ability to find out about something that you wouldn't normally have been interested in.
Yeah. And I think that global discussion is really one of the reasons I started doing these podcasts, because I don't know if where people get information anymore. I mean, yes, you go online, you jump around to a bunch of different sources, and I guess we all have our sources to get information from, but there's no long discussion about things. And, we're getting some of these long podcasts. This will never be a 2.5, 3 hour podcast. I can never sit here long enough to do that. But I mean, there are people that do, and I'm fascinated by that. But where do you see that evolution of people getting local information, local, community information, or an in-depth discussion on bigger public policy issues? Where will people find that in the future?
That's a really good question, and I wish I had a really good answer for that, and I don't. And in fact, as I look at my future career, I have to think about those sort of questions, because I don't know what the future of journalism holds. It certainly looks like that there's going to be a continual withdrawal of resources for local news, which is obviously a shame. I mean, while you're going to see sort of this middling coverage of national issues, maybe a cursory look at certain things, but nothing really beyond scratching the surface. And I think it's a degradation of our understanding of our community life in America today, right? And it's shocking and sad, and frankly, for someone who has spent his entire adult life being a journalist, it's very disillusioning to see our community just not care about this stuff anymore.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say about the community, and there's no question about that, because that is the closest connection, to people, and people, what knows happening on their streets or in their local government or the police department or their schools. But I see it so significantly from the state side that there's probably even more focus on local issues, and certainly more on federal issues. But what really, in my opinion, gets lost is, what's happening on the state level, which I think impacts people's lives as much or more than either of those other two angles. So
You're absolutely correct. And as a former Sacramento reporter, I can tell you it's often very difficult to draw that connection when you're on deadline between what's happening in Sacramento and what's happening maybe in Costa Mesa. And part of that is a reflection of the fact that you have editors that maybe down in Orange County that don't understand what's happening in Sacramento and don't give the reporters in Sacramento the time to really do the reporting that's necessary to draw those sort of connections, so people can see those how things, the interplay between what happens at the state level and what happens at the local level. And I mean, those aren't simple stories to tell. And oftentimes, especially with the daily news cycle, you're under pressure to say what the governor has done today, but that might not be the most impactful story that you can tell for a reader in Orange County. But you need the time and an editor with the vision to understand that, to really invest in that.
During my political life in Sacramento, there was always one Orange County Register reporter assigned to Sacramento, multiple LA Times folks. The year I was Speaker of the Assembly, I think the Orange County Register had 4 permanent reporters up in Sacramento covering Sacramento politics. And today, I don't believe there's any Register reporter covering Orange County, the third largest county in California.
I believe that's correct. I don't have boots on the ground reporting on that to confirm that. I can tell you why.
But I remember your last office up there. I think it was a small little office, but at least you had a stationed point there. Huh?
We did. When I first started at the Orange County Register in Sacramento, we had 4 people up there, an editor and 3 reporters.
Right.
Within my first, well, it was certainly within my first year, but I think it was within my first 6 months, it went from the 4 of us to just me.
Right.
And so we had a that office that fit 4 people. All but one desk was removed for me, and so we had this large space for I think for maybe another year, maybe 2 years. Eventually, what ended up happening is I cut a deal with the editors at the Register, in which I was able to get a home office. I got sort of an apartment within walking distance of the state capitol, and they sort of gave me a little money for an apartment to go towards a rent for an apartment. So I had a home office that I would then walk to the Capitol for.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then when I left in 2013, there was a reporter that replaced me, but I believe she left, not much longer after me, and I don't know that they ever filled that role.
Yeah, in that evolution, I know there was a lot of things happening because there were different groups that came together to do investigative reporting and hired some very skilled local reporters to cover bigger stories and be able to write longer pieces on public policy issues of importance. And you took that route, right?
Yes. I mean, that was my inclination has always been as a reporter to go more in depth, to do longer pieces. People call that investigative reporting. I guess that label fits me. That's always been my inclination. I've always liked deeper stories. I've always liked stories that say more. I've never been particularly enamored with short breaking news stories. That's just never been my personality.
Yeah, but maybe you could share where that led in terms of your whole coverage of the foster kid program in California.
So, well, that's actually an interesting story, and I don't know that I've ever told you the entire part of the story, but I'll tell it now. While I was working at the Orange County Register, I at some point decided I wanted to start volunteering, and so I started volunteering for the Big Brothers Big Sisters, and my little brother. I don't know how long into our relationship that we've been paired, ended up in the foster care system, and I started attending with him just out of support his foster care hearings. And I just remember sitting in those hearings going, it's really amazing to me that this is all of these things were happening to this child. He was, I think, 14 at the time, and he didn't quite understand what was going on around him, and it seemed really like heartbreaking that these these court hearings were happening around him and his sister. They didn't really quite understand what was happening to their lives, but these monumental things were happening to them. And so I just kind of tucked away in the back of my mind, like I would love to if the time ever came, to do a really in-depth story on foster care. And so that was just sort of tucked away in the back of my head. And I continued reporting on traditional state politics issues in Sacramento. And at some point along the way, while I was doing that, I became aware of this trend in California, and then I later found out was happening across the country, of counties essentially outsourcing the recruiting and managing of foster family homes to private agencies. And I found a state level report that suggested there were some problems in those agencies, and I really wanted to do some reporting on that. I pitched that to the Register. The Register really didn't want to give me the time or resources to do that sort of reporting. They wanted me to focus on state level, what the governor was doing today kind of reporting. And at that point in my career, I really wanted to report more on marginalized populations and do reporting that I thought would help people. So I ended up getting a fellowship at UC Berkeley's journalism school for mid-career professionals, which gave me a large amount of time and resources to really dig into privatized foster care in California, and then we expanded it to the United States. And I ended up doing a fairly substantial article for Mother Jones magazine about privatized foster care and how children are abused and neglected and sometimes killed in privatized foster homes. And we told that story through a number of narratives about children and families, but also looked at the economic incentives inherent to this privatized foster care model, and how that sort of created some perverse incentives for foster agencies to maybe not check on the qualifications of a foster family as much as they should.
Mm-hmm. So you did the in-depth reporting, investigative reporting, whatever we want to call it. But for those of us outside the profession, we can understand the investigative reporting, and because it's digging into in-depth coverage of the issues. So
yes, absolutely.
You did that. That was one of your products that came out of that Berkeley.
Yeah. I did that. It was a fellowship. They actually extended my time there because one of the key court cases that I was covering ended up getting delayed. So I ended up extending my time with Berkeley a little longer than anticipated. And when that was over, I had to go and get a job, and I ended up working for a small nonprofit based out of Pasadena, but I continued to live in Sacramento, that reported on health, safety, and the environment. And we wrote stories that were then placed in different publications across the country. And I did a number of stories for them about dangers of working in the recycling industry. I did a story about a company that provides healthcare services in jails, and it was providing substandard care for inmates. I did a story about best way to describe this, moving companies that would essentially steal people's goods when they tried to move. And I sort of unraveled how these
I actually
work.
think I remember you telling me about that. So yeah, that was through this whole period, and then you went back to a traditional newspaper role in Las Vegas.
Yeah. So what happened was, as I was doing that, my wife and I had our one and only child, and my wife was working in an insurance company. We were living in Sacramento. We needed two incomes in order to live in Sacramento. Our daughter had to go to daycare. My wife was really not happy about that. So I was sort of keeping my eye open for some new opportunities. And sort of out of the blue, the Las Vegas newspaper approached me about helping to start up a new investigative team at the paper there. And my wife and I, looked into it, realized it was a cheaper cost of living to live in Las Vegas as opposed to Sacramento. And in fact, with what they were offering me, we could survive on one salary. We could even afford a house. And so, while we had some concerns about moving to Vegas for a number of reasons, it seemed like the best decision for our family. And so to use a Vegas term, we rolled the dice and moved to Vegas in early 2017.
Wow. And having Brian join us today isn't in terms of getting his biography presented on his journey through journalism, but in fact, where that journey has led him, and I think it's really, really exciting. I mean, the focus then, you have this job with the Las Vegas Review Journal, the largest newspaper in Las Vegas, and you're doing primarily investigative reporting
Yes.
and in-depth coverage of different big issues that are happening within the city.
Yes. I mean, I was tasked with doing a lot of more of your long-term reporting. I did a large project on problems with business registration at the Secretary of State level in Nevada. That in fact was happening in other states as well. And then I also did a lot of research into domestic sex trafficking. Vegas is, by some measures, the mecca of sex trafficking in the United States, and that was a major focus of my work at the Review Journal, and something that I came to feel very strongly about, and felt was very important to see to fruition.
Yeah. So it is interesting. You use the term sex trafficking. Define that.
Sex trafficking essentially is a condition under which a person, typically a woman or a girl, is forced, defrauded, or coerced to engage in commerce around sex. Sex trafficking always has some sort of commercial element to it. If there isn't a commercial element to it, that would be, by definition, rape. So there is some sort of commercial
Transaction engaged.
Something, or it could be something involving someone has control over your employment, for example. That could potentially fall under the category of sex trafficking, depending on the circumstances. The critical component, however, is the notion of force, fraud, or coercion. Of course, in American society, we're familiar with the concept of pandering. That is, putting somebody out to engage in prostitution. Pandering is silent on the notion of what the panderer is doing to the person that's selling themselves. Sex trafficking is very explicit that the panderer, for lack of the term typically is pimp, is either forcing the person to engage in this activity, defrauding the person to engage in this activity, or coercing the person to engage in this activity. Essentially, what we're talking about here is brainwashing or blackmailing somebody into this lifestyle.
Yeah. So I always thought it was interesting because we all started hearing the term sex trafficking in the early 2000s or something, and kind of shifted from talking about prostitution in communities to sex trafficking. And what do you think that shift meant? Why was there a shift in terminology?
Well, I think there was a shift in terminology because we as a society began to recognize that people who engage in prostitution are more often than not victims of awful life circumstances, and in addition, victims of manipulation by someone behind the scenes, i.e. a pimp or a sex trafficker. And I think it really is a reflection of the fact that we as a society have learned and grown to understand what that dynamic is. It's not that dissimilar to the evolution our society has seen as it relates to battered spouses, or as it relates to people that are addicted to certain drugs. There was a time when we might dismiss a drug addict as just a throwaway person. We now understand that there is more to it than that, and that is, I think, what has happened with people engaged in prostitution. We've come to understand that there is a lot more to it than just these are bad people with low morals. That is not the case at all.
Yeah. So when you're for the paper, you're doing long-term research on, as you say, domestic sex trafficking, which means within the United States,
yes,
as the domestic word referencing.
Yes.
So what did you start to uncover and see?
I mean, I looked at it from a lot of different angles. As you may be aware, Nevada does allow certain legal forms of prostitution in its rural counties, in the brothel system. Those are only in rural counties, not in Las Vegas. Now, a lot of people don't understand that subtle nuance. And so a lot of people that come to Vegas assume that prostitution is legal in Vegas itself. It's not. However, the very powerful casinos that operate in Vegas have no incentive to dissuade tourists from thinking that the prostitution is legal there. They don't want their tourists to leave Vegas to then go to a legal brothel, an hour away. Basically, as a result, in Las Vegas, there is a an acceptance, a certain level of acceptance of prostitution and of sex trafficking because it's viewed as being okay in the community, and it's allowed to fester, thanks to not because there aren't vigilant police and knowledgeable police, and not because there aren't advocates that care, but rather because of the political and business influences affecting the community at large.
Mhm. So you start understanding the sex trafficking business in Las Vegas, and a lot of prominent institutions, entities, companies, people are connected in some way to that process,
Connected in some way, or
accepting of it.
accepting of it. Clearly knowledgeable that something is going on,
Right,
but
right.
but is not doing anything about it.
Right. So tell me what came out of that in terms of the creation of news articles and stories you were looking to present
There was
to the paper.
Yeah, I mean, there was a number of articles that I was working on, looking at the brothel system, looking at how juveniles were being treated in Las Vegas. Nevada law says that anyone under the age of 18 engaging in prostitution is by default considered a victim of sex trafficking. However, because of a lack of resources, the only place that those victims could go would be to juvenile hall. So, I mean, we were looking at that issue. I also looked at the issue of how prostitution laws were being enforced on the Strip, specifically the disparity between the arrests of working girls and the arrests of sex buyers, that is Johns.
Yeah.
So those are the sort of the three major areas of reporting that I was looking into.
Right. So through that, you gain a lot of information, a lot of insight, and you put all of that together in a book. So you are
Yes, I
here at this point in time, and I think I don't ever want to say the precise time of day this is or the date, but I think your book rolls out this week as a new product and available and all that at the Vegas Concierge is the name of your book. So tell me what people see in this.
So Vegas Concierge uses as a narrative vehicle a years-long investigation into a large sex trafficker in Vegas, and uses it as a narrative vehicle to explore how American society fails victims and survivors of sex trafficking.
Right. So you focused on a number of women that you were able to build trust with to have some of these conversations, and one of which I know you referenced quite a bit in the book, and talk about her and her story.
Yes. So the book, each chapter of the book is told from essentially three different perspectives. The perspective of survivor, the survivor in our book, the main subject of the book, her name is Angela, and she's a survivor of sex trafficking, a very courageous, well-spoken woman. She tells her life story, and the second major character or major subject of the book is a now retired vice sergeant that worked in Las Vegas, and talks about his perspective on not only this particular sex trafficking case, but sex trafficking in general. And then much later on in the book, I enter as a subject and talk about my own experiences reporting on it, and then looking specifically into this one case that we focus on.
Right. So a little color on that case. We don't have to go into too much detail because I certainly don't want to spoil the book for anybody. But I mean, there is a case that a very prominent person in the Vegas structure,
Yes,
that is engaged in overseeing a sex trafficking operation.
the book focuses on a very prominent pimp in Las Vegas who went by the street name Molly Mall. He used his essentially used his pimping proceeds to buy his way into the hip hop music business, and became a relatively well-known hip hop music producer. He appeared on Love and Hip Hop Hollywood, the VH1 show, and has appeared on a couple of other reality television shows. He has a number of producing credits. He's appeared on some songs as well. Among hip hop heads, he is a known entity, and he was he was a pimp.
Yeah. And with that, those within the police department that in the vice department where Officer Hoyer was officer or
Sergeant
Okay,
Hoyer,
I don't
yes.
want to diminish him in any way. Was really leading much of the vice operation in this area. Knew of him and knew of a lot of the women that were captured within the sex trafficking operation.
That's correct. Don Hoyer, the second main subject of the book, helped lead a very extensive raid on Molly Mall's operations in 2010. It was a simultaneous raid of 7 different properties, including Molly Mall's mansion in Las Vegas. And Sergeant Hoyer was intimately involved in sort of the planning of that raid, but was not in charge of that raid. And in the events subsequent to that raid, the case took some shall we say odd turns that resulted essentially in at the end of the day, Molly Mall getting a very small sentence compared to the crimes that he has been proven to have committed.
Right. So I don't want to go into that detail of what you're talking about because it is interesting because there's some interaction between people within law enforcement and some of the prime players there. But from the victim's perspective, how did she respond in that, and what is that evolution of somebody? Because that's what you reference in emphasizing Angela's experiences. What has been that transition for her to move from that away from being trafficked?
Well, I think, and I think Angela would tell you this herself. Many people who are victims of sex trafficking don't even recognize themselves as victims. And so the book talks about her own evolution of sort of recognizing herself as, well, wait a minute, I haven't chosen this life for myself. This has been sort of thrust upon me, and I've been sort of manipulated into this subculture.
Yes, but pause right there. I mean, manipulated into that, meaning the pimp or other entities really controlled full aspects of her life.
Well, what you have to understand when you talk about sex trafficking victims and survivors is almost always they first had some sort of very traumatic experiences in their lives. Maybe they had a relative that was murdered. Maybe they were sexually abused as a child. Maybe they were just neglected as a child or ended up in foster care. But whatever the case is, typically sex trafficking victims have had some sort of very serious trauma early in their lives that have affected their self-esteem and have made them feel less than. And what then happens is that a pimp comes along and essentially preys on that vulnerability and makes the victim feel like that the only thing that they're good for is to sell their body. And once that manipulation occurs, the pimp then moves in and takes total control of the victim's life. That can mean the victim has no access to money at all, might not have access to their driver's license or their birth certificate. They're being controlled in terms of where they live, what they eat, what they do, their schedule that they keep. All of that is they then become under the thumb of the trafficker. The difficulty for people that are in that lifestyle is that oftentimes they don't recognize that they have been manipulated. They think that they've chosen this for themselves. And so the first step, and I think Angela would say that the first step for her, and we explore this in the book, is sort of recognizing, oh, I didn't choose this for myself. That there are forces outside of me that have put me into this position. And so that's the sort of beginning point where victims are then able to see that they have some agency. And then from there, it's still a very difficult transition out of that lifestyle. I mean, there's some research that suggests that it can take victims like 7 tries before they successfully leave this lifestyle, because it can be so pervasive and so gotten into the root of who they think they are. When in truth that isn't who they are, but they've been led to believe that this is all that they're good for. And so there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, deprogramming that victims and survivors have to go through before they're able to fully be able to leave that subculture and join what's known as the straight world.
Yeah.
The square world.
Yeah, no, in straight square, whatever that works out to be. But I mean, a part of your book though is telling of the story and telling the back and front of moving through this process in Las Vegas within the police department, within the corporate media culture of Las Vegas, but I know you're really proud of the fact that you do talk specifically about the issue of sex trafficking in terms of offering people resources if they are caught up that way. What people like many of us who see someone in an odd situation, what to look for to see if they are the type of people that, or the people being trafficked, and then how do they respond? And even to the point of your discussion of, prosecution, the challenges and the difficulty of going through a prosecution.
That's correct. It was very important for everyone involved in this book that it be more than just a dramatic true crime story. We wanted it to be more than that, and we thought it was important that it be more than that. So the book, in addition to, I think, telling a compelling story, includes a lot of resources for victims and survivors, a lot of resources for people who might be concerned that someone they know is a victim or survivor, as well as a pretty thorough discussion of different policy options in terms of addressing this issue on a local and global scale.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very fascinating, and I'm so glad you're here to make your first full book presentation at an event later today. But it's good to reconnect with you, Brian. I mean, part of this is enjoying you over the years as a reporter in Sacramento, and during the time I was mayor, involved in other Sacramento things, but to reconnect now and to hear of your great work in this book. So I hope it's a success and people pick up Vegas Concierge. And thank you very much for spending time today.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your support, and it's fun to reconnect.
Yeah, it is. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right.